This is session 3AD. Remember that for the purpose of feedback. And this session, when I hear that word ransomware, sends chills down my spine, because we've heard some horror stories, of course, especially in this country with the National Health Service, what they experienced with ransomware. And who'd have thought that we could also experience it on the mainframe? So don't forget at the end of the session to leave your feedback. That's very, very important. And like I say, keep a note of the session code, which is 3AD. Some of you have been experiencing issues with the QR code when leaving feedback. So what I would advise you to do is go after the session, go to the agenda, go to our session, click on it as if you're going to look at the synopsis and scroll right down to the bottom, and you will see the link to the feedback. And if you can do it that way, that would be great. So it gives me great pleasure, a very early start for our presenter, Al Surrett, who's come to talk to us about ransomware on the mainframe. So I think it's just gone 6:30 there in Calgary, Al.
Certainly is.
So we really appreciate you getting up so early, and thank you for coming to present to us. So the stage is yours, sir. Thank you very much.
My pleasure, Jamie. And with that, we'll move over to the conference charity. And I would certainly ask everybody to pay solid attention to that. And if you find it's time for charitable giving, I think that's a terrific charity to give to. So thanks for having me aboard, Jamie. A very warm welcome to everybody in the UK from a very warm Western Canada. So it was 20 degrees Celsius yesterday, and luckily I managed to get out on my bike for a little bit. But don't worry, you know, we're going to have freezing cold weather and lots of snow pretty soon. So Canada will live up to its reputation as being, you know, the ski center and cold and wintry. With that, I'm going to move over to the agenda. This is really intended to be an educational session, and you know, with a little bit of luck, by the time I'm finished, everybody in the audience will have educated me thoroughly, and you know, I'll know a lot more than when I started. But until then, maybe we'll be able to share a couple of thoughts. So we're going to talk about ransomware. We're going to talk about what's typical and what's not. I have some breaking news for you later on that I think is very relevant in the security space. And with that, we'll really get started. But I really believe that FAM is a very good technology, and we'll see exactly how that applies in a mainframe context. Key stuff here at Maintegrity, we're career mainframe systems programmers and operations management. And, you know, we've really worked hard over the years, 40 of them for me, and, you know, approaching 40 for most of the rest of the guys here. We've been trying to make the mainframe relevant through innovation. So connecting it to the cloud, using it for things that mainframes are good for. You know, centralization of big data and those kinds of things are where we've worked all our lives. So we've been in the enterprise software business. We have launched a number of different products, some of them bought by and built into the operating system by IBM, some of them working closely with our colleagues at Neuro Software, and more recently, CompuWare and BMC. So we've been kicking around here for a long time. We started with this concept in 2014, and we turned it sort of real in 2017. But we actually thought we were doing something completely new for the mainframe. And yet, when we got into this business, we found out that Tripwire had already invented kind of similar looking stuff for Linux and Windows machines mostly. And they were joined by Qualys and TrustWave and that sort of thing. So this is really the notion of file integrity monitoring has existed for quite a while in the open systems area. Initially, we started out with the detection capability, and as you see, we'll go forward and we'll talk about how FIM technology plays into forensics, into recovery, into change assurance. So what is the threat? And why is there a threat? Mainframes are big. Mainframes are important. $7.7 trillion worth of credit card payments. 29 billion ATM transactions go through mainframes. People care about that. People care about their bank balance. People care about mainframes, even if they don't know that they exist anymore. And more recently, some of my colleagues and I built an IMS FastPath application in 1988 to manage POS equipment, 3,500 terminals across Canada, which was sort of leading edge at that point. But never in my wildest dreams did I really think that, nearly 90% of the ATMs still run through IMS FastPath. So, I'm learning a little bit more about the mainframe world every year as it goes on. But the IT world is increasingly unsafe. And that's because of hackers, because of rogue sovereign organizations, and because of the dark web. Troy Hunt, who's a well-known hunter in the security space and a well-known researcher, says there are millions of user IDs and password pairs for sale on the dark web. One of my really trusted colleagues, Chad Rickensrud, and for that matter, I think Mr. Wilson would also say, this is a real threat. This is a real issue. Just go to the dark web, buy some legitimate credentials, enter the company you want as if you were one of their staff, and there you go. Criminals with legit credentials are absolutely indistinguishable to most perimeter security. That means they get in. Typically these days, it's a two-phase attack. We attack the backups as a hacker, and then you attack the real target. That way you can't recover. We'll cover that off in a little bit more detail in a minute. Conventional ZOS security. Well, we all know conventional ZOS security is rock solid. The firewalls and the access control are top notch. We've been working on them for 40 years. They're really good. They are all on the premise that we're going to let the good guys in and we're going to keep these bad guys out. But once you're through the perimeter with some of these stolen credentials or some of these bot credentials, I'm now an insider and I have to start thinking about insider threats. But what about rogue staff or trusted employees that go rogue for a number of different reasons? Financial problems, disgruntlement. No matter how good your security perimeter is, criminals can and will get in. But, if you don't care about inside threats, maybe you should. I think more and more focus is happening around keep the perimeter strong, but allow more tools to help on the inside, fill some of the gaps that are there. And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today. So first of all, we're going to talk about the anatomy of a ZOS attack. Well, the entry point is very much the same as if it was open systems. I'm going to send you a phishing email, or I'm going to send you a bad link, or I'm just going to get your user ID off the dark web. But at some point, as a dedicated hacker, I'm going to gain access to your machine. Chad Rickensrud does a really good analysis of exactly how that happens. But once I get onto perhaps an attached Windows machine, then I'm going to do some key logging, or I'll go out and do some network sniffing to find out exactly how to get into your mainframe. And once I'm into your mainframe, then I can find out all kinds of things about the environment I'm in. In the 6 steps of a ransomware attack, that's called reconnaissance phase. It takes place right after we penetrate. As soon as I'm in there, I look at the master catalog and I kind of say to myself, oh, gee whiz, you know, here's a nice listing of everything that's here. Why don't I find something valuable and I'll just encrypt it, and then they won't be able to use it. And then whoever the victim is will just have to pay me. That's what we call the fortify and infiltrate stage. Spoliation is actually when we come in and typically these days compromise the backups and then turn around and compromise a database or something of major importance. And then of course, all I have to do is send a ransom note and ask for some Bitcoin and get ready to receive the same thing. So, I mean, that's really how that whole process works. It's a very straightforward thing. And because it's straightforward, it's easy enough for hackers to complete. And remember, they don't actually have to get anything off your system. So I'm not actually trying to get files out. I just have to get in and then encrypt things, because a ransomware attack is simply encryption where the victim does not have the key. What's FIM? What is file integrity monitoring going to do about that? Well, first of all, let's have a look at how it works. We go to your production system at its trusted level. And the first thing we do is we're going to create a baseline. So we simply do a scan and we create a set of keys for all of the sensitive information that's in your production system. And when we do that, we use the crypto cards on the mainframe to do a hash code of each component. So in the FIM world, we need to get a secure baseline that we can trust. And then we're going to put it in the vault and we're going to encrypt that and we're going to keep it for a long time. But in our result log, we're going to go out there and write a baseline and say, we got a baseline saved here, and it's at this particular version at this particular time. Of course, as you roll through new releases of the operating system, new releases of applications and that sort of thing, you need an automated way of uploading that, and you simply just rerun the scan and then simply tell the FIM tool that the new version when it goes into production. So basically, it's a snapshot of all your files and data sets that are sensitive. Later on, we come back and say, okay, let's take another snapshot. We'll generate the same sort of keys. We'll compare the two sets of keys. If the two sets of keys are the same, we say everything's good. And we validate the success. But you'll see in a second what else needs to happen. And of course, as we discussed, you know, this sort of technology has been around for ages in the open systems world. I'm going to focus on whitelisting for a second. It's a little bit different thought pattern. So typically we think about keeping the bad guys out and tracking bad things that could happen with signatures or whatever. Whitelisting is a little different. It actually puts in place a list of authorized programs and authorized components at a particular level. We'll break into that in a second. But that list of discrete entities that are authorized need to cover your APF lives, of course, and your system environments, your program product libraries like IMS, CICS, DB2, and that sort of thing, and applications. Of course, it is easiest and best if you can auto-discover that. So some of the more modern tools, some of the better tools will go out and actually auto-discover the baselines. All you have to do is point them at that production system image. Everything else can be automatic. So what we would often see is, as a result of the QA approval process, it would just kick off an auto-discovery process, create the baseline, and then subsequent scans can look at that baseline, make sure that nothing's changed. Of course, you need to support multiple software versions, and you need to know when they go into production. So it would be easiest if you can do that auto-discover time after time, and there's no manual effort involved in that. So automation in that area is really important. And then you need active enforcement. You know, are you monitoring the whitelist on a regular basis? Some people for a banking system might do it hourly. Some might do it weekly, but you certainly need to do it pretty regularly. Typically, any malware requires a program change or a parameter change. And that can trigger an alert, even if you have legitimate credentials, which may not trigger an access violation. You can trigger an alert if you are looking at the contents of the programs and our parameter stream. So that really augments FIM, file integrity monitoring, really augments good perimeter security. And it really requires good perimeter security. They work together. And then when you have an alert, you need to get it to the response team in a hurry. Typical FIM services. Okay, well, one of the things we do is whitelist. Get a list of all the elements as they should be. We'll see that in a little more detail in a minute. We probably want real-time alerts. You probably want to be able to gather forensic data in every case when you get an alert. Now, knowledge of the mainframe is important in this context because you need to know, go get the SMF records, where all the access information lives. You also need to understand where are the approvals. So is that in a change management system there? How exactly does that work? After you've done your forensics, you may need to do a recovery. You may find that it's a false alarm. And FIM data can really help ferret out what's a real change versus a suspicious looking access. But if it's a real alert, then you need to have something we call policy-driven recovery. So you would want to set policies for your company that drive the recovery. One of the things you might want to do right away is suspend the user ID until you even know whether it's a problem or not. You can always re-enable it later on, but then take those elements that have been changed and not approved and quarantine them. And of course, you're going to see in a minute how we can build some restore jobs by using the information that comes typically with an FIM tool. Audit records, that's important if you care about compliance. But another little wrinkle has come out of the banking area recently. Checksums and hashing codes are pretty much the same thing. Since FIM depends on these kind of hashing codes and checksums, it's also very easy to subject your backups to that same sort of integrity verification. So in the banking resiliency recommendations, you'll find check the backups, and we'll see why that's important. This is an enterprise environment in which we find ourselves. So we do need to understand its ZOS. We need to understand the applications that are running there and the subsystems that are running there. Good tools auto-discover everything. And when I say everything, I mean all the things that shouldn't change. So executables, unless there's been something come through the change management system that says it should be updated, they shouldn't change. JCL and proc libs. Well, that kind of change can be just as damaging as modifying a program that's running in your environment. Same thing is true of your configuration parameters. And let's not lose sight of the backups. Once the backups have been created, they should not be opened for update again, and they should not be modified. Same thing is true of logs. FIM processing is good for all that sort of stuff. And for encrypted files, you don't need to decrypt them in order to use most FIM tools. You simply create a key at the encrypted level and then compare it the next time around to a key at the encrypted level. And then, of course, there's the USS environment, which perhaps is the easiest place for non-ZOS hackers to break in. Offloading the processing is critical. We don't want to incur a lot of CPU time for doing this. All major mainframes these days ship with crypto cards. It can be detected as to whether it's a crypto card or not. If you don't have a crypto card, obviously you would have to do all that processing in software, and that attracts CPU time. But 99% of mainframes now have crypto cards. In the Z15s, they are amazingly fast crypto cards, which is actually very good for FIM processing, but very bad if you happen to be a hacker and you want to very quickly encrypt somebody's database. Well, the crypto cards really help you in that respect. Everything these days needs to be high availability design. Any good FIM tool would be that. But it's important that you're integrated with the other tools. So we want to provide conclusive proof. It's important that the FIM tool can run on the mainframe in a fully confined mainframe environment, but that it can cooperate with open platforms or perhaps even cloud tools. For instance, if I want to put information into an SIEM, well, it may well not be running on the mainframe. Or if I want to check information in my change control system, that could be running out in the cloud somewhere. So those are key elements, and good tools will use a REST API to talk to those directly. Most of the time we see scheduled, on-demand, and batch integration for scans. That means if a real person wants to run a scan at any point in time, an auditor walks in and says, I want to prove that everything's up to date on your mainframe, and just run a demand scan. If I wanted to run an automated in an automated manner, I run it scheduled. If I want to run it every time I do my month-end processing, I do it in batch. Here's a real key element though. With the changeover to a new generation of staff, you really have to provide a GUI type of interface as well as 3270. And both of those have to work very quickly and very efficiently so that staff of both experience and newer to the mainframe can operate and get access to the same information. And of course, then you need to do real-time alerts. Let's see how that works exactly. So, as we said, FIM runs on a scheduled or on-demand detection basis. And, the first time around, we write that baseline information to probably its own log files, and perhaps it might also, in real time, update your central consoles, your central security console. But it's going to put all that information in that baseline information if in a vault, which it should protect. But time goes on and we continue to look at things, and for the most part, we find that nothing's changed because it's the good old mainframe and we're not making that many changes to it, so everything's cool. However, one day, something happens and something has changed. Now, we send that alert directly to the response team. When that email comes into the response team, it should be as simple as clicking on that item, and then the system itself should select based on your preferences, the 3270 interface or a GUI browser-based interface. The second that interface comes up, it already knows what's affected. The reason for that is we're doing these continuous scannings, and we know exactly which components did not match. So all of a sudden, I know the scope of the attack. Same thing is true of the interval. I simply go back to the previous record where everything was okay. And the time of the failure record, I compare the two. Now I know the interval in which the attack took place. So as a forensic investigator, I don't have to go back to the beginning of time and try and look at every single access. Once I know the interval and I know the components, then it's a relatively straightforward process to just go out to SMF in real time, get all of the information from the buffer as to who and the exact time that things got changed. Now I know the guilty party. Once I've done that, I kind of go, oh boy, it would be really nice if I went out to Helix ITSM or ServiceNow, maybe running on the cloud somewhere, and check those components to see if they were in an approved change request. And if they were an approved change request, why were they changed? Then I can make better decisions about whether they should have changed or not. Next thing I might want to do is perhaps they weren't approved. Now I know I've got a problem. Boy, I might want to do a side-by-side text comparison and see if those parameters look like they should have changed. Maybe it was just a comment card, but maybe it was actually a pretty big problem. And I really need to be dealing with a recovery situation here. At the same time as all that's going on, I could be escalating that problem or kicking off another scan directly from my SIEM. This makes if you're managing from your central security console, that makes this whole process much more effective in terms of finding out information about the problem and then getting around to reacting to it. So if I have a problem and I'm escalating and I have to recover, then certainly some of the things that I'm going to do is I want to make sure that I invoke my recovery plan. But I would like to have that defined in advance, consistent with my policies. I also want to be able to suspend that user ID. I want to be able to quarantine. I want to be able to take all the corrective action that I need by verifying my backups. And in truth, if my backups have been violated, you'll see in a second, that might give us a very worthwhile early warning. Then I might want to bring in some assistance on the recovery side. Because modern tools know where your backups exist, because I just verified them, and you know the components that need to be recovered, and you know the date to which they need to be covered, modern tools can build that recovery process for you. And all the JCL can be pre-built. Then, when I decide, consulting with the rest of the team, that I want to recover, all I have to do is pull the trigger. I don't have to go build all that information. And then the last step, of course, once I've done that recovery, I might want to verify the restore overall and make sure that everything is back in the exact environment, in the exact manner that is approved. So that's pretty cool stuff. But if that wasn't enough, some of the tools can also do real-time processing. So reading the SMF logs as they're being created, you can look for things like a backup opened for output that already exists. And if that kind of thing happens, then you can kick off the standard alert processing, where you might go and schedule another run of your on-demand FIM tool, or you might go directly to the response team and kick off those forensic activities. Let's look at this from the other side. Okay, so now let's just pretend that we're on that forensics team. I get an email. I get home at the end of after work, and I get an email, and that's a red colored email. And I kind of go, oh, this is like important. I better do something here. I click on the email. In the best case, you would bring up a GUI. The second that that GUI comes up, it can already have access to SMF information because we know when the last good scan was, we know when the failing scan was, we know what the component name is. So we just go check, just go fetch the relevant records. One more click, and I go out to ServiceNow or BMC's product or you know, a myriad of other products, and I look at the change. Oh, you know, in this case, there was no change. Oh, no approved change record located. Most of the tools can use the configuration records that are available in your change management system. So it's pretty straightforward to relate the two, but it does take a little work when you get on site typically to make that relationship. Third click, oh, I bring up my side-by-side compare. Oh, in this case, the IP address changed from New York to Russia. Well, that could be a problem. Another click, bring up the recovery assistant, build that JCL, get ready to recover. That happens in seconds. And that's really the bottom line here. All of a sudden, you've got a problem. And it doesn't matter whether it's ransomware or any other malicious kind of attack. And what do you need to do? You need to respond. So first of all, you got to be able to detect things. Then you got to be able to respond. But you need to respond with answers, not with questions. If I have to go and do this manually, this is like a long-term process, and you probably have minutes, hours, or at the very best case in a ransomware attack, maybe a day or two, in order to get all that information and decide whether you're paying the ransom or not. In many cases, we've seen where there was malicious attacks. Just the analysis process can take weeks. And the IBM sponsored Pokemon report, I mean, they really talk about this response time taking months. And that's just not going to work in the context of mainframes. There's too much depending on us. So what do we do? In the ransomware context, well, the hacker probably can still get access. They still go to the dark web, and you still buy user ID or send you some bogus emails or whatever. That means they can probably get onto that Windows attached machine. But the second that they start to go into the mainframe, FIM processing kicks in. And when they make any change to parameters, to programs, whatever, it can be tracked. It is tracked because it's a comparison between what the alteration, what the modified component was, and what the authorized component was. So those changes are very visible. So, you know, what do we really want to do? We want to be able to get into this business very easily. We don't want to do a lot of work, and we don't want to have it take a long time to build that whitelist, to build the checksums. So we want to discover. Then we want to be checking for early warning. That can happen within hours of installing a product to do this kind of thing. Then we want fast reaction. That means automated forensics. Somebody's going to say, well, what else did they do? And you better be able to answer that question. So the last piece of this is that if we do this quickly enough, we can neutralize the hacker before we have to pay a a ransom. So that's kind of the basis for FIM processing. And I think you need to think about all those elements. We're trying to make your life easier. FIM cooperates with perimeter security and makes it much easier to respond. So we could defeat the ransomware attackers on the inside of the mainframe. Maybe not so much before they get attached, but perhaps there are other tools that you should be looking at in that area. But I did tell you there was breaking news. Now, Jamie, I don't know if we've got any questions at this point, but it's a logical a jumping off point. If there was a question or two, certainly I'd be happy to respond.
We don't have any questions in the chat at the moment, but does anybody have any questions at this time?
Well, maybe I'll press on, and you can interrupt me if anybody sends anything in. But guys in the audience here, please send questions in. Like, how the heck are you going to hang me out to dry if you don't ask me any questions? Anyway, let's press on. In the last 30 days, there's been a particular type of ATM attack. I have not seen PCI send out warnings with the words urgent attention in them anytime recently. So this is a kind of a key element. And you remember that we're talking about ATMs. This is millions of dollars of cash stolen from ATMs. Now, how does that happen exactly when an ATM has 100 or 200,000 pounds or euros or dollars in them? How does that exactly happen? Well, it takes a heck of a lot of coordination. So it tells me that the people that are doing this are pretty organized. So does that make me concerned? Boy, does it ever make me concerned. This is like the mafia or a rogue government or something. This is not easy to organize. It requires remote access into a card management system, which is then altered. Now, if the card management is on the mainframe and you have FIM, you're going to determine that that's the case. And, you can stop that attack before it takes place. So they're going to have to either change an executable, or they're going to have to change some parameters around thresholds. Those changes can be detected. PCI says it's most likely an inside job. Remember when we talked about ATMs being attached to IMS on a mainframe? Can you imagine where these specific, and a plural, specific events took place? I would bet they took place on a mainframe. So PCI comes out with some recommended practices, and they recommend file integrity monitoring not once. You can go look at the send out the note from PCI. They actually recommend file integrity monitoring twice in the same note. Then they talk about an incident response plan. Well, don't you think it would be better if that was a policy-driven incident response plan? And they talk about employee monitoring. Well, we're talking about monitoring people that are already inside, whether they're internal people, whether they're bad people with an internal ID, whether they're staff, whether they're mad, whether they're happy. We're just monitoring the changes with FIM. So, we catch that sort of thing. And the other thing that's really important, we didn't really talk about this morning, is how file integrity monitoring plays within the context of DevOps and within the context of managing changes. But if you are monitoring using FIM, you can make certain that no legitimate or illegitimate changes bypass the change system or the DevOps process. So you get strict separation of responsibilities. So I think this is a big deal. This has happened. The item came out on October the 7th. This is a real problem. It is a continuing problem. Remember these two words, urgent action. And I'm going to leave it at that. So take a good look at that. It is a time when I have seen, for one of the first times, the compliance folks, which is really PCI or public payment card industry, actually take real action. So I think it's a big deal, and we should pay attention to that.
Al, I've got a question on PCI DSS. It's been a while since I studied it, but maybe you're going to answer my question next. But have they actually? Oh, okay. So have they actually mandated that you need a file integrity monitoring solution, or is it kind of a recommendation?
Well, 11.5 says, okay, so actually should have paid you for that one.
I'm not a plant, by the way, folks. I'm not a plant.
Sorry, Davey. So 11.5 does, at the 3.2.1 level, which went in 2018, it says you must have a change detection mechanism, for example, file integrity monitoring. And what does it have to look at? Changes, additions, deletions, changes, alterations, approved or not approved. Those are the kinds of things that it needs to look at. Unauthorized modification, critical system files, configuration files, context files on every computing platform that processes credit card or debit card information. So without FIM, you're not compliant with 3.2.1, which has been in place for 2 years. Now, truthfully, Jamie, enforcement has been pretty lax. So, you know, the credit card companies are kind of betwixt and between in terms of saying, you know, we're going to cut off your access to credit cards, and then we're not going to make money on credit card transactions. So they're a little conflicted in doing that. But an executive in the company has to sign off that all this is in place. And that's this attestation part. But, you know, the real issue these days is if you're not doing this and there's a violation, somebody is going to get fired. And it's happened in lots of cases already. And it's going to trickle all the way down to whoever said we were secure when that wasn't the case. So did I answer your question, Jamie?
Yes, it certainly does. And it's interesting because PCI, you know, it's been out a few years now, isn't it? And it's kind of, you know, like how these regulations, they're very fashionable very quickly. There's a lot of attention on them, and then things go quiet, and you kind of think, well, actually, are people really compliant with it still? You know, and I know you're duty bound to have the annual tests and things like that, but it's one of these that you don't hear about, but still is very, very key to part of your security hardening program. So yeah.
Well, I hadn't seen any real teeth, and I'd be dead honest with you. I hadn't really seen any evidence of it being anything but a paper tiger for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
But two things have happened recently. One, in the US, they are finally pounding down this channel of being compliant. So, you know, there were accepted variations, they call them compensating controls, which are a bunch of weasel words, which somebody can put together and say, oh, you don't have a whitelist, but doesn't really matter because, you know, insert weasel words here. And that was what very simply, you're either doing checksums on your backups and verification of your backups, or you aren't. You're either creating whitelists or you're not. You know, how can you have a compensating control that says it doesn't really matter? But with version 4, my understanding, so this is the second piece of this, we've had reports that they're getting very serious about fines, and they're getting very serious about enforcement in the US at least. the second piece is really about compensating controls. And my understanding is that version 4, which will come into effect expected the end of 2021, which I have worked on myself because we used to be a PCI partner. And then I got so mad at them because they didn't enforce my, I didn't do that anymore. But anyway, that being the case, the understanding is that the rules will not change much. So section 11.5 will still be there, but compensating controls are going to be tightened up a lot. So my expectation is that auditors are going to get a lot more serious about this. So I can imagine that people should expect to hear more. And then, somewhere along the line, an FIM tool can give you proof of compliance that you can't get any other way, because you have to know if things have changed or they haven't changed. Which brings me to GDPR. Here, there isn't much specification as to what you need to do and what you don't need to do in order to be secure. But the fines certainly catch your attention. And in defense of GDPR, I would say it was kind of clever of them to say, if you're looking for a set of rules, go to PCI. Go to the NIST environment in the US. Take a look at ISO 27001. Implement those kind of controls. You'll be in good shape. And that way, you're not going to get a $50 million or 50 million euro fine like Google, or a 28 million euro fine like Telecom Italia. So the point of this is these fines are for real and they stick. And there were over 220 fines in 2020, over 45 just this October. So it's a big deal and you need to be careful. And FIM does not protect you completely against a GDPR fine, but it sure helps.
Yeah, it's interesting you say about the fine. So the one that stands out there for me is the British Airways fine that came out recently, didn't it? And I think that it was supposed to be something like, I want to say 128 million, but they had taken into account, I think, that of course the pandemic and that they were taking steps to improve controls. But it just kind of echoes, it would have been absolutely huge fine for them, especially for an airline, that they are running at pretty much tight margins as it is, that, what can happen. And I've always, I've been a kind of a strong advocate for GDPR because I think it is a wake-up call to businesses that you can't mess around with people's, you've got to take the necessary precautions to protect our data. And I think this sends loud clear messages out that you will fall foul of a fine. Unfortunately, there are casualties out of big fines like that, and typically it means cuts in the organization that can often mean job reductions and so on. But
it's pretty painful.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest with you, Jamie, I don't happen to have 50 million euros sitting in my cash account, so I don't want to get slapped with one of those fines.
No, definitely not. Yeah.
The other thing that's kind of interesting here is that, I guess it's more true of denial or anything else. 30% of companies just don't pay attention. They haven't even started with the GDPR plan. So it's kind of hard to get compliant if you don't start.
I think what's going to be interesting over when you see fines like that with the British Airways being fined, I do think it will get through the message. There'll be wake-up calls like, CISOs, executives will be looking at this and saying, my God, they're really serious about this, and we can't end up in that situation. But unfortunately, for many organisations, the wake-up call doesn't come until something's happened, and then they get the fine, of course. So
well, and then it trickles all the way down to the individual level. And for those of us that are paid to make sure that this kind of thing doesn't happen, it can be pretty painful.
Yeah, indeed.
So I'm going to close up with the last little piece that, if we've got some folks that are in the banking community, I think the ATM issue should be top of mind for you. And I really think you should go out and find, and I mean, if anybody has trouble finding the PCI document, I send them to you directly. Send me an email. I give you exactly what PCI sent out. But it's pretty important in the next little while, I would say. But also the leadership from the central banks. So the central banks, after the 2008 financial meltdown, started to see how fragile the interrelationship between the banks were. And within, in vintage style, within 3 years, they started saying, oh, well, if one of these banks fails, they could bring down the entire financial system. And of course, then we have entropy, complete social and financial breakdown. But they now recommend things like validating your backups, monitoring configuration files. So they're starting to take action. So I have worked in the last while quite a bit with some of the major central banks. This is a real push for them. So if you're in the banking community and security, in particular, file integrity monitoring, but security more generally has been, kind of good enough. Our perimeter's pretty good, and we pass our audits. I would expect that you can think that that will be changing, and it may change faster than what you want. So you might want to start taking some corrective action. You might want to make sure that when somebody comes in and says, how did this go? How exactly did this go on for 20 years? You might want to have something in your back pocket that you can pull out and say, wow, I recommended that we should improve our security and nobody listened to me. At least that gives you some protection. It might not improve the situation for your company one iota, but at least at the individual level, there's something there. So I think for the banking community, this is now a critical issue that has to be addressed, and everybody else will be hot on their heels. So we talked enough about checksums on backups. I'm not going to go into it anymore. One of the more clever things that you might run across is something called a sampling scan. If you think about what auditors do when they come in, to do an audit, they don't check every single invoice that the company produces. They check 3% or 5% or something like that. And then they say, well, if those are okay, then probably everything else is okay. And we can do the same thing in terms of sampling scans on these backups. You can just take a sample. Now, if you think about it, if a hacker breaks in and they're going to ransom you, they're simply going to encrypt a file or database or a critical data set or your customer master file or something. They're going to encrypt the whole thing. So in a way, if you read the first block and the last block and they hadn't changed, you'd be pretty certain that your file's still okay. But in some cases, you can actually specify a percentage. And you could talk to your auditor and say, I'm going to take the overhead to the lowest possible amount that you will allow. So do you want me just to do the first block and the last block in this data set? Do you want me to do 100% of it? Do you want me to do something in between, 0% and 100%? That's kind of a clever way to look at the overhead one more time again. So sure, take the arithmetic and get it off on the crypto card as soon as you can. But if you don't have to read all those blocks, why would you do that? So in a virtual tape environment, you can actually just read the first and last block because that's known in a tape context. In a on a disk data set or a database, you might want kind of more. You might have to read the whole database anyway, but that's necessary. You might do that full pass on a weekend or something like that when you got lots of time. So just a thought on that. And here's really my final slide. I like the way the NIST framework lays out what do you need to do. So, if you're really looking for a place to start, you could do worse than look at the framework. Every government in the world has repurposed this and given it their own name and made it available. And we just think that you need to add more things to it. So in the detection area, they don't really talk about backup checksums. They don't really talk about whitelists, but they will. Those are coming. We can guarantee that all of those standards are converging. So they'll pick this up from other areas. Restoring and verifying the restore. That's the kind of thing that moves in from the other standards. So identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. Yeah, you do those 5 things and the 297 things that exist underneath of them, you'll probably be pretty secure. But I really wanted to nail this down. It's a nice, simple, easy for senior management to understand kind of graphic. So part of the problem with security is who cares? The guys that sign the check, you got to capture their imagination. Primary colors, not many things to think about, focus. Focus down on this. Make this happen. You'll be a lot happier. And we'll thwart hackers. So I don't need to go through all this. We've beaten this to death. But by golly, if I was working in line management for a bank or insurance company or a big industrial complex that's using mainframes and depends on it, I would want to make bloody sure that I had done everything that I possibly could. Oops, what did I do there?
Thank you, Al. So we have one question from Christian. I don't know if you want to unmute your line, Christian, to ask this question, but he asked, is there active monitoring for special users? Do you mean system special users, Christian?
So if you've got RACF special or
hello.
Hello.
Hi, Jamie. Hi, Al.
Hi.
Sorry, what I'm meaning is, for example, if a special user, a sysadmin is modifying a file, is this actively monitored or not?
Yes. Typically, that's the exact kind of thing that you would want to monitor.
Right. So there is some sort of trigger or something, an alert that will be triggered.
Yes. So when a parameter is changed, let's just assume that most of the system parameters, most of the system changes would be a parameter setting. Yes, most of the tools that are available will support that. And in the case of FIM, it doesn't matter what the authority of the changing user ID is. The comparison between what it's supposed to be or what the approved level is and the modified level, that will always cause an alert to be raised if they're not the same.
Okay, but what if this special user has the ability to modify the FIM, for example?
Okay, so they're typical FIM tools will have certain defenses built in. So communication typically would be encrypted. The scans themselves would typically be random or pseudo-random. So, you might not schedule that every week. You might schedule it somewhere between a week and 2 minutes to make sure that you know, it catches all those kinds of changes. But in the particular case of somebody with a high authority level, what you need to make sure is you have separation responsibility. So whoever's looking after the FIM tool is not the same person that has the group special authority. So that would be typical to be managed with separation responsibilities.
Okay, thank you very much, Al. Thank you.
Thanks, Christian. Any more questions from anybody?
Geez, I guess I didn't throw enough grenades into the room. I didn't get that many questions, Jamie.
I think you just scared people.
Well, you know, I'm scared, so now we're on the same
I'm
footing.
bloody scared as well. There you had it. Yeah, you heard it there, folks. It's not just for your that little PC or laptop sitting on your desktop there. This is for the big stuff, enterprise stuff as well. So yeah. Okay, Al, thank you so much for taking us through that. Like I say, certainly a lot of food for thought there, and I really enjoyed the session. So thank you very much. And I'm sure we will have you back at some point next year for an update in this this critical area. So this was
I would really like to ask people to rate the session, though. I would really like you to do that. Because, you know, if you don't rate the session, I don't learn anything.
Yeah.
So please help me out there.
Yep. So this is session 3AD for the purpose of feedback, and like I say, please do give Al and all the presenters for any of the sessions that you attend, whether it's you know, from one of the streams or one of the kind of the main sessions. Please do give feedback. Like I said earlier, the QR code, we're aware we're having some issues with that. So please go to the agenda, click on Al's presentation as if you were going to kind of look at the synopsis and his presenter bio. Right down the bottom of the screen, you'll see a link there to feedback. And there you can to give feedback. This is also very important, not only for the presenters and for us in GSE UK, so we can help improve the conference for you for next year and beyond. For those of you that are collecting a CPE certificate, for, say, for example, ISC Square or ISACA, then your certificate is automatically built, and the content of that certificate is built based on the feedback that you have actually given for all the sessions. So there's more of an incentive on the security stream, I would say, to that. So that is it for today on the security stream. But before I go, and we're back tomorrow, by the way, at 9 o'clock. We've got a lot more sessions over the next 2 weeks on the security stream, and we're back at 9 o'clock tomorrow UK time, GMT, with Lenny Dimmick Bradshaw, who's going to talk about a project that he's been working on around dataset encryption. So please do join us for that. But we haven't ended the conference for today, by the way. We've got a 30-minute or now 25-minute break up until 2:30. Some of the other streams are still running. So, you know, if there's anything of interest, please do feel free to attend those. There's a really good session coming up at 4 o'clock, again, GMT time, which is COBOL in its 7th decade. God, I can't believe 70, wow. And then we've got the quiz night. So get your GMTs, your whiskies and everything ready for 5:30. There's a quiz with Macro 4, sorry, 6 o'clock, sorry, with Macro 4 hosting it, and that's a 2-hour quiz, which sounds really interesting. So chance for us to kind of have those virtual drinks that we would normally have at the physical conference had we been there this year. So thanks everybody for today. Thank you so much once again, Al. Excellent presentation, and I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow at 9 o'clock for the security stream.
And I'll look forward to seeing everybody next year in person.
Oh, and before you go, don't forget, donate to the NHS charities. Don't forget the link there. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks a lot, Jamie.
Thank you. Bye.
Best to everyone.